It is a fact of life that we all need to eat to provide our bodies with the nutrition we need, but mealtime is far from simply being a functional activity. It's also an enjoyable one, which is why so much time and effort is put into creating perfect, delicious recipes. And sometimes, whether it be for the flavor or simply the adrenaline rush, people feel the need to eat something that could pose a serious risk to their well-being. Hopefully, you haven't had a meal recently, because we're about to show you the strangest, most disgusting, and bizarre dishes on the planet as we look at 15 dangerous foods people actually eat. Number 15. Sanakji. Seafood is popular in virtually every cuisine around the world. You'll often see calamari or octopus on a menu no matter where you go. In Korea, however, there's a dish that's one of the most dangerous in the world to eat, called sanakji. It's made from a species called the long-arm octopus, which is a much smaller species than the giant octopus that most people are familiar with. Before being served, the octopus are killed and are cut into pieces, with the dish mainly being made up of pieces of tentacle. In fact, a single bowl can contain the appendages of several octopuses. And the thing that makes it so popular is that because of the complex nervous system in the animals, the tentacles continue to move long after death. This makes a serving of sanakji appear to be alive, and it's actually one of the most difficult meals to eat because the suckers often hold tight against the bowl and make it almost impossible to pick them up. If you manage to, though, you need to be extremely careful when swallowing the tentacles because the active suckers can potentially latch onto your throat and block your airway. It's surprisingly common for diners to start choking, especially if they've been drinking alcohol too, and there have been a number of deaths in recent years because of this happening. Number 14. Casu Marzu. Cheese is one of the greatest culinary inventions ever. Not only are there countless different varieties, but it goes with pretty much anything, and this is an integral part of a large number of recipes. Not every type of cheese will have your mouth watering though, particularly a specialty type that's made on the Mediterranean island of Sardinia, and is so controversial and potentially dangerous that it's expressly banned throughout most of the world. Known as Casu Marzu, the process of creating it starts like any other, but after creating a pecorino cheese, there's an extra step that makes it so unique. Part of the rind is removed and it's left outdoors, which allows the cheese fly, Piophila casei, to lay eggs inside it. With each female able to deposit up to 500 eggs, the cheese is soon crawling with maggots that, because of the acid in their digestive tracts, breaks down the fats of the cheese to create a velvety soft texture. Locals only consider the cheese to be worth eating if the maggots are still alive and will spread slices of it onto flatbread, including the little live creatures. The process of eating it is somewhat complicated too, because the maggots can jump up to 6 inches or 15 centimeters into the air, so diners will usually hold their hands up above the cheese to stop them from traveling too far. It certainly sounds disgusting, but there's a serious risk involved too. The maggots are on occasion able to survive human stomach acids, and if they do, they'll start burrowing into the stomach lining, and this can lead to a nasty condition called pseudomyiasis, which can potentially lead to death. Number 13. Cassava. The cassava is a species of shrub that's native to South America, and because of its starchy richness, is often grown as a crop. In fact, it's third only to rice and maize as a source of carbohydrates in tropical regions around the world, and it's thought as many as 500 million people rely on it on a daily basis as a source of nutrition. One of the reasons it's so popular is because it's surprisingly drought-resistant, which means it can be grown in regions with very little rainfall. And the root can either be eaten in a similar way to a potato, or the starch is removed to produce tapioca, which is an ingredient used in a range of different ways. Cassava, however, has a downside to it. It definitely shouldn't be eaten raw. All parts of the plant contain 3 compounds: linamarin, lotaustralin, and linamares, which when combined produce hydrogen cyanide. While the levels of this deadly substance are relatively low, it is quite possible to eat enough to ingest a fatal dose, with several people in Venezuela dying this exact way in the past few years because the food shortages there had become so extreme that they felt they had no choice but to resort to eating raw cassavas. Number 12. Echizen kurage. The Nomura's jellyfish is a huge species of jelly that's native to the Sea of Japan and surrounding waters. Growing up to 6 feet and 7 inches or 2 meters in diameter, they've been known to weigh as much as 440 pounds, which is the equivalent to 200 kilograms. Blooms are quite common, particularly in recent years, and large specimens often become trapped in fishing nets, which causes severe problems to that industry, as well as to the local ecosystem. In 2009, for example, a trawler fully capsized as the crew tried to pull in a net that was full of the animals. Because of their prevalence, a few ways have been explored for how to use them, such as turning them into fertilizer and also finding culinary uses for them too. Known as Echizen kurage, the jelly is used in a variety of different dishes, from soups to noodles and even in ice cream, but there's a risk with consuming them. As with most jellies, they produce a natural toxin that's used to help them defend themselves in the wild, and also as a means to trap prey. If the jellyfish isn't properly prepared before it's cooked, the toxin can be present in high enough doses to cause severe illness or even death. What's unusual about the risk with eating Echizen kurage is that it's not even considered to be that delicious, so people are taking a chance simply because it's cheaper than most other proteins. Number 11. Ackee Fruit. Fruits are produced by plants to encourage animals to transport their seeds elsewhere, but they also provide a great source of nutrition, while being delicious at the same time, which is why they're found on the shelves of just about every store in the world. They're available in all sorts of flavors and textures, and the Ackee fruit, which originated in West Africa, is a popular variety across the Caribbean. Used in a range of savory and sweet dishes, it's vital to ensure the fruits have ripened properly and are prepared in the same way, because if they aren't, there's a very real risk of ingesting a fatal dose of toxins. Before ripening, Ackee fruit contains hypoglycin A and hypoglycin B, which in the human body are converted into a compound called MCPA, which interferes with how other enzymes function. Soon after eating an Ackee fruit that still has high levels of these compounds, a diner may start exhibiting symptoms of Jamaican vomiting sickness and can ultimately die if medical treatment isn't sought immediately. Still, the fruit, along with the dishes it's used in, are so delicious that it's almost worth the risk to try them. Number 10. Raw kidney beans. Kidney beans, which get their name from the similarity in shape to a human kidney, are an incredibly popular bean variety that's grown and eaten around the world. A vital ingredient to a chile con carne, but also used in soups, Creole dishes, and plenty more. You may be surprised to learn that they're actually extremely toxic if not prepared correctly. That's because the beans are a natural source of phytohemagglutinin, which, if ingested, interferes with the natural functioning of the body's cells. It can severely inhibit the ability of red blood cells to transport oxygen around the body, and eating as few as 5 raw kidney beans can lead to serious side effects within a matter of hours. Luckily, this can be avoided by cooking the beans at a high enough temperature, and because of the risks involved, it's almost impossible to buy them in their raw form. Those in tins, for example, have already been pre-cooked, but if you do have the raw version, they need to be boiled for at least 30 minutes to eradicate the poison. One of the most common misconceptions is that slow cooking at a lower temperature will also make them safe. But if you do this, you could potentially increase the amount of toxins that are present, and in this case, you only need to eat 1 bean to suffer from nausea, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Number 9. Blood clams. Mollusks are a popular seafood specialty around the world and are notorious for their potential dangers if they aren't cooked properly. There's one species, however, where the risks are far greater than the rest: blood clams. They get their name because their insides are full of a dark red liquid that contains hemoglobin within the soft tissue, which then oozes out when they're opened. Native throughout the Indo-Pacific, they burrow within the sediment of the seabed, where they filter the sand and mud for nutrition. They're also farmed in large quantities, but with each individual filtering more than 40 liters of water themselves each day, they're highly likely to pick up pathogens like hepatitis, typhoid, and dysentery. This is normal for mollusks and shouldn't necessarily be a problem, but it's the way that they're prepared that often leaves people at risk of infection. Normally, seafood like this should be depured, which is a process known where they're kept in clean, fresh water to remove any contaminants, but this doesn't always happen. If they're boiled or roasted, the temperatures involved are usually enough to make them safe, but quite often they're either poached or eaten raw, and if this is the case, the diner is at a severe risk of contracting a nasty, life-threatening illness. We're constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Alfalfa Sprouts. Alfalfa is a species of plant that's believed to have originated in Asia, but has historically been so sought after for culinary purposes that it's now grown virtually everywhere around the world. The sprouts make a nice addition to various dishes, and the plants have a secondary use for feeding farm animals. But if they're consumed before being ready for harvest, they can be extremely toxic. This is because the seeds in sprouts contain high levels of an amino acid called canavanine. It's very similar to another amino acid that our bodies need, arginine, and when it's present, it'll compete and result in the production of faulty proteins. In humans and other primates, this will lead to symptoms very similar to those seen with lupus and other immunodeficient diseases. And while it won't be fatal enough to begin with, continued consumption of these seeds or sprouts will soon become life-threatening. As the plants grow, the canavanine is converted into other harmless amino acids, so while they still contain a small amount when fully grown, it's a fraction of the concentration that's present earlier on. The best way to avoid complications is to simply be patient and let them grow. And as long as you don't eat huge quantities, you'll be fine. Number 7. Giant bullfrog. Giant bullfrogs are a species of frog that are native to regions throughout Africa, where they're found in a variety of habitats, from dry savannas to marshes, lakes, and pastures. Weighing as much as 3.1 pounds or 1.4 kilograms, they're the third largest species of frog that we know of and are surprisingly aggressive, happily trying to hunt and eat anything they believe is small enough for them to overpower. As with many species of frog, the giant bullfrog develops potent toxins within the body that are used as defensive measures. These are concentrated within some of the internal organs, but are also present on the skin and in the flesh, and usually ensure that a predator, after having a bad experience eating one, won't want to risk eating another. This doesn't stop people from continually eating them though, and they are seen as a delicacy in Namibia. They remove some of the organs but eat the rest of the animals, something that's said to be safe after mating season, because that's the time when levels of toxins are at their lowest. Sometimes things don't go exactly to plan, and someone does ingest a heavy dose of the toxins. While this is unlikely to be fatal, it will cause severe kidney damage and will require immediate medical attention to prevent things worsening. Number 6. Fugu. Originating in Japan, but also considered a delicacy elsewhere in Asia, fugu is the most dangerous meal in the world because of the very real risk of death to anyone who eats it. It's made from a puffer fish, which is served either raw as sashimi or as part of a chirenabe hot pot. Several species are used, but by far the most prized is the tiger puffer fish, which also happens to be the rarest and most dangerous. The problem, however, is that despite how delicious the fish is said to be, it produces high concentrations of tetrodotoxin to protect against predators in the wild, and this substance is present throughout the fish's body. The concentrations of the toxin differ with the flesh, though, so it's possible to carefully remove the deadly parts, and you're then left with morsels of flesh that may give a tingling sensation on the lips, but are otherwise safe to eat. The preparation of fugu is highly regulated in Japan to ensure this is done safely, but even with these precautions, there are still several deaths attributed to fugu consumption each year. With no known antidote, the best anyone can do to someone who's consumed the toxin is to put them on life support and hope their body can flush it out on its own. Number 5. Fessique. Fermented fish is a delicacy in countries around the world, with the origins being from before wide-scale refrigeration was possible, so people had to find different way to preserve meat. In Egypt, the tradition involves catching a species of mullet from the Mediterranean or Red Seas, drying it in the sun, and then preserving it in salt to create what's known as fessique. It's a dish that's often eaten at the yearly Sham el-Nassim festival, which has been held since the time of the ancient Egyptians. But because the fish may be preserved in the salt for as long as a year, there's a very real risk that there will be a buildup of bacteria called Clostridium botulinum, something that even a microscopic amount of can be fatal if eaten. Despite these risks, the delicacy is still widely eaten, and there are a number of instances each year where people are rushed to hospital to be treated for eating poorly prepared fessique. The Egyptian government regularly runs awareness campaigns to encourage people to only buy it from trusted sources and to be extremely careful if making it themselves. Egyptians who live elsewhere in the world can also find themselves up against regulatory hurdles if they want to celebrate the festival in the traditional way, because the dangers associated with fessique mean that it's been banned in many countries. Number 4. Raw honey. Honey is one of the most wondrous substances that's created in the natural world. Produced by bees from the nectar of plants, it's intended as a food store for the hive, but humans and other animals have harvested it for thousands of years because of its sweet taste. There are health benefits to honey too, and it's said to be so pure that it won't ever spoil, even after 1,000 years. But this doesn't mean it's exactly safe to eat large amounts of raw honey from a hive. In fact, the majority of honey that's on sale in stores has been pasteurized, because like other natural products, it's possible that the honey may contain some unwanted organisms. The biggest risk is from Clostridium botulinum, but there can also be compounds called pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which can cause damage to the liver and are suspected, although not proven, to be linked to the development of cancer. Raw honey in small quantities should be okay, but if you like to eat a lot of it, it's very unwise to eat anything other than pasteurized honey, even if it is being sold as something with unparalleled positive qualities. Number 3. Death cap mushroom. While the name of the death cap mushroom might well be enough to convince you not to want to eat one, and they are extremely poisonous if you ever do, the problem with them is that they often look very similar to other mushroom varieties. So while people don't purposefully eat them, they're quite often consumed by accident when foraging for wild mushrooms. Found mainly across Europe but also elsewhere in the world, they normally have a slight greenish tint to their caps, but can also be pure white too. Looking just like a Caesar's mushroom or a straw mushroom, death caps are full of amatoxins, which inhibit cell metabolism and the production of proteins in the body. The biggest problem, though, is that exotoxins are heat resistant, so no matter how much you cook the mushrooms, the danger will always be there. There have been several important people in history who have died from eating the mushrooms, such as Charles VI of Austria, the Roman Emperor Claudius, and even Pope Clement VII. The only real way to avoid risking the same fate for yourself is to only get mushrooms from a trusted source. And if you're picking them in the wild, make sure you have someone who can identify the variety that you've picked before you eat them. Number 2. Bagels. Bagels are one of the most popular types of bread products in the world. Created by Jewish communities in Poland in the 17th century, they're made by forming a ring of yeasted dough which is boiled and then baked. They're now very much associated with New York, but cities all around the world have their own ways of making them. And the one thing that's probably most surprising of all is that bagels are one of the most common causes for Americans to have to visit the hospital, and are even more dangerous than being burned by your coffee. It's thought that at least 3 billion bagels are eaten by Americans at home each year, which equates to around 11 per person. But the danger doesn't come from actually consuming them, but from preparing them. In 2011, more than 2,000 people managed to slice through their fingers so severely when cutting a bagel that they had to go to the emergency room, making it the 5th most dangerous kitchen activity. The main cause of injury was trying to cut one with a non-serrated knife, which makes it much more difficult. But something that led to almost half of the injuries was people trying to cut a frozen bagel with an extremely sharp knife. If you want to avoid being part of a statistic like this, always defrost your bagels first, use a proper knife, and be careful. Number 1. Hackarl. With very few native land animals, residents of Iceland have always turned to the seas for the vast majority of their food. This has led to some rather unusual delicacies being developed. Probably the most famous and the most dangerous is known as hackarl, which in English is normally called fermented shark. The species most commonly used for this is the Greenland shark, which is a type of sleeper shark, and one that can't be eaten soon after it's been caught. That's because instead of releasing waste products like urine into the water, it simply builds up in concentrations in the shark's flesh and slowly filters out through the skin. To humans, the high levels of urea and other compounds make it poisonous, so the sharks are gutted and buried in sand with a weight on top to expel any fluids still in the body. It's left there for several months, during which time it also starts to ferment, and then after this it's cut into strips and hung to dry for a few more months. The result is something that smells extremely fishy and has a noticeable aroma of ammonia. It isn't exactly something that people outside of Iceland tend to have the palate for. Anthony Bourdain once described it as being the single worst, most disgusting and terrible tasting thing he had ever eaten. And that's before you take into account the inherent dangers too. Still, having high levels of toxins, too much hackarl can lead to a painful side effect, and almost certainly a trip to the local emergency room. Would you dare to try it? Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.